And the next speaker is coming in from virtual space, so we have a zooming in. So hopefully there's no issues with Zoom. Cool. So without further ado, we have two speakers. So Prescott Pym and Bruce Biesecker. I'm really hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, around how not to run a SOC. So Prescott must be crazy because he's been working in security operations for over 20 years. He has been a leader in Verizon managed services in the Asia Pacific region for the past 14, and prior to that, 7 years managing secure internet gateways in government. Currently, he is responsible for the operations of the Verizon APAC Advanced SOC, running 24/7 from the Verizon Canberra offices and working with customers in Australia, Asia Pacific, and across the globe. Also, we have Bruce. He is responsible for overseeing Verizon's global security operations. In this capacity, he leads global security teams in 12 countries to oversee Verizon's 24/7 Secure Operations Center, security engineering, service delivery, client care, and identity management. So he's just a little bit busy. Cool, so can we have a warm round of applause and hope they hear us on the other side of Zoom? Welcome for Prescott and Bruce.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. And it was very close. It's Biesecker, very close, but thank you. Good afternoon. And Prescott and I, what we wanted to do as the introduction has been doing this for decades now. And we run 9 global security operations centers. And what we wanted to do is to talk about how not to run a SOC. I think we've seen lots of ways in which SOCs are run, and want to try to share some of the knowledge and experience that we have and the things that you should try to avoid and hopefully make it simpler for you. Next slide, please. So as was stated, my name is Bruce Biesecker. I'm the VP of Global Managed Security Operations. That's overseeing SOCs in Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Chennai, and Hyderabad, India, Luxembourg, Diegem, Belgium, Dortmund, Germany, as well as in the US, we have it in DC, where I'm coming from, as well as Cary, North Carolina. This covers both commercial and federal spaces for multi-different national governments, as well as the client care and delivery side. And Prescott, turn it over to you for a little intro.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And yeah, I really appreciate you dialing in at 12:30 at night, your time. Yeah, usually I'm on the receiving end of those sort of calls, so it's a bit of payback for me. But and also you've survived your COVID jab, the second one, so hopefully you can hold out for the whole session.
That'd be great. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, what's a Verizon? If you go to the next slide, Verizon is a household name in the U.S., but outside the U.S., not so much. 99% of the Fortune 500 are clients of Verizon. We are a global telecommunications company. As a matter of fact, we are a Fortune 13 company. And the business unit that Prescott and I work for, which is Verizon Business Group, if it was cut out from Verizon itself, would be a Fortune 100 company. We work in 150 countries. There's over 4,300 networks managed globally. Our current market cap is about $250 billion. As stated earlier, for the managed security services, have 9 security operations centers. And the reason I want to say managed security services is Verizon as a whole, we have multiple security teams. There's corporate security under the office of the CISO that's working against and helping to protect billing centers, end devices. We have their network team to ensure that attacks that are happening are not spreading across the network. We have our professional services, and Prescott and I are in managed services where we are providing security services to enterprise clients. On a monthly basis, we see well over 2.7 trillion events that come through our systems that we are processing and handling. From the telecommunications standpoint, over 1.4 million kilometers of fiber around the globe, and we have over 135,000 global employees. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the complexity of security, right? On here, it's off to the right, you can see it is who led the plans for your security events this year, right? Was it the CEO, was it the CTO, was it the CISO, or was it COVID? And I think we all learned that we had to deal with this. And it's the unknown unknowns that really drive security, right? The thought that digital transformation is someone else's job. The concern a lot of times that SOC teams are disconnected from the wider business. And as we all had to deal with COVID and work from home, remote access services, we had to deal many times working with clients where they would tell us things that we had to get the network up, we had to get people working, we'll worry about the security later. Now, the security professionals, that was heresy, but understood what they were doing. And but it's also the complexity. There's so many things. There's so many new devices. Moving to the cloud, the transformation and complexity is also adding to the unknowns that are out there. Next slide, please. Good, Prescott.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that fact, I think, Bruce, that if you how not to run the SOC is to ignore those unknowns. You've got to go seeking out how can I cover across all those bases. It's actually a really important day for Verizon today, and we'll talk a bit about this through the presentation. But each year for the last 14 years, we've released the Data Breach Investigations Report, which is a bit of a Bible for what's happening out there in the security world. So one of the charts I thought was really interesting to pull out from here from the impact of COVID-19 was what happened in terms of trends of events over the past 12 months. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone sitting in the room there around the fact that there's been an uptick in phishing and ransomware. These are the stats we draw globally from both, as Bruce mentioned, our own network, our own managed services, and then partnerships with companies around the globe. In Australia here, State Government of Victoria, Paraflare have been contributing, as well as regional certs from around the region. So, phishing and ransomware have seen upticks of 10, 5% from our stats from last year. But it's also interesting to see that some of the misconfiguration and misdelivery of emails and things like that have actually gone down. I think that, to Bruce's point, goes to show that a lot of organizations are starting to think about this a bit more, putting in place the right governance structures to make sure that their security operations teams are watching for misconfigured events that are going on in their network. Bruce, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's look, we're dealing with an issue right now here in the States where one of the companies that's dealing with the pipeline of gas that goes from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to New York and was shut down by ransomware. Just came out today that they did end up paying $5 million to the dark side for this. And there are gas shortages on the East Coast. It also shows the delicate nature of this and the infrastructure and how people are getting, the bad guys are getting smarter. It's a business model if you look at this, and that's the other one that's driving this, which is it's ransomware as a service, and you see DDoS as a service, and they are really the hackers and the bad people are turning this into a lucrative business on their side. And on one hand, it's very scary to see how professional they are at this, but it's real impacting. Next slide, please. So on this one, we want to touch base on input, and just adding more does not necessarily equal output. Next slide, please. So more visibility does not equal more security. Right? Garbage in, garbage out. What we're seeing is and Prescott will touch on this later on in the presentation, is there's the false belief that if I just get more logs and I get that from every device and I just pull this in, that suddenly I'm going to be protected. You get the overload of the false positives, which drive the SOC. Then they're responding just to more and more and more, and not necessarily the, quantity does not equal quality at all. And it's redefining the needle in the haystack. Now, what you've done is, instead of making it easier to find that needle, you've just made the haystack 10 times larger, and you're still looking for the needle. Add to that the extra cost that you're going to have of the storage. You have to index all of the logs, and then you have to have the team that's going to be running on this, and it's totally inundating them. So one of the biggest issues that we see out of SOCs, and the improvement is, they need to work with the security engineers, with the different systems, with IT, with dev, on the cloud and on the prem, to define what are truly the logs that they should be getting, and pull those in so that they can take action on those. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so this is something that I wanted to step through. This is how my mindset works when I'm thinking about what is information, what is relevant for a SOC. So sort of starting at the base here, I've actually used this sort of well-known information hierarchy triangle, sort of coined by Ackoff in 1989, who was an information scientist, where we talk about what is data, how does that become wisdom. So if we're thinking about it from a SOC perspective, at the bottom of the triangle here, we've got a ton of data, and it's building up more and more. Organizations are now building data lakes to keep that separated from their seams, because it's too expensive to run a seam with all the information you need to put through it. We see a lot of customers these days that you're really scrutinizing what's going to be the input into their seam, because it's expensive to pay for it. But we're swimming in this sea or data lake of information, and drowning in many cases. So I'm just going to sort of run through how that's going to map to the SOC. So let's take, for instance, that we think about the IOCs that we might get from threat intel as raw data on the network. By itself, without any context, it's really meaningless. It's great, we've got an IP address or a hash, but what does that mean? If we move up then into the information section, if you wouldn't mind moving the transition, thank you. You've sort of got the IOC, you've got an information about what that threat might be. That's starting to pull some of that together to make some context for the SOC and the business environment there. So you're connecting, maybe a couple of information, correlating that together, coming to some sort of conclusion. Hey, there might be something going on in the environment here. That's great, and it's good to know. It's actionable information for the SOC analyst. But we actually need to go up another step and think about, okay, what is the actor, and what are their tactics, techniques, procedures that they're running through? How is that going to be a threat to the business, not just the SOC? This is starting to get into the realm of knowledge, where we've actually got some sort of idea of what we need to protect against. And then stepping up from that, we need to move from knowledge into wisdom. And wisdom is where you can take actions that will protect you into the future. And this is where we need to start to integrate these sorts of things into, the theme of the conference, SOAR platforms, protections in place. If we think about the NIST framework, protect is right up there at the front. So this is how we get that base information, the data, the IOCs at the bottom, and turn it into wisdom that provides value to the organization. Anything you want to add there, Bruce?
No, I think this goes to the point of the data and the overloading of the data. And clearly what it is, as you've identified, it's pulling in the threat and the knowledge, and then getting to that point. And as you see, just adding more data at the bottom doesn't get you to that wisdom. And it's really about leveraging frameworks, and definitely what we view as a key differentiator is the SOAR tools. Next slide, please. So, empire state. And the other big mistake is trying to build empires just to handle the work. Next slide, please. So, you know, a lot of people think that, you know, automation, right, destroy all humans. And as you can see it off to the right there, it's the, unfortunately, it's the SOC analysts playing whack-a-mole, right, trying to respond to the IOCs. You don't do automation just because it's a buzzword. And what you really have to do is, you know, people have to take a look at this, and you have to get the right risk exposure. And just as throwing more data at a problem doesn't solve it, you need to have the, you know, the defense in depth, but also you need to understand and go through and identify, right, what are the assets that are most at risk. I know this, to this audience especially, it sounds like blocking and tackling, not telling you anything, but this really is overseen so many times. And you have to understand the assets, and then what is that exposure? You also have to put in the time for the processes, right? If you don't have a process and it's not standardized, and it's not standardized globally, you're not going to be able to automate the work. The other downside about automation is if you don't do it right, the great thing about automation is you can do something 10,000 times in a minute. The bad thing is if you don't do it well and correct, you can make 10,000 errors in a minute. And that's where you have to have your automation, and if you're using SOAR and playbooks, you have to put that through the same ITIL process, peer review, change management, into dev, into staging, into UAT, and into production. You don't want to have someone just sitting there designing a playbook on their own, you know, hitting run and, you know, takes down systems. And finally, the last one, and we'll touch on SOAR in a few slides here, but throwing bodies is at the SOC it's not the solution. That is not going to get you anywhere. Yes, there are times, and when you're going through explosive growth, you need to add it. But adding bodies just to handle that data pyramid is absolutely the wrong answer, because you're just going to be exacerbating the problem. The problem is not going away. If anything, now it's worse, because now you have 20 people that are having the same problem as opposed to 12 people that were having the problem. Next slide, please. So Prescott, here, you want to take this one?
Yeah, that, and going directly on from what you said there, Bruce, you know, just throwing lots of bodies at it, it just, you know, that contributes to SOC burnout, which for many security operations managers in the audience there, you know, it's one of the challenges of our time managing technical teams. Yeah, SOC turnover is a challenge, and I'm sitting here standing here in our SOC in Canberra, and we haven't automated everything. You know, it's not why you don't see people in the background here; they're just hiding. But yeah, I found this a really interesting graphic to talk to. You know, where do you need to focus your SOC resources? This is from a report that was done by the Scientia Institute a couple of years ago. Wade Baker, who used to run the data breach investigations report from Verizon, you know, went out to about 190 different SOCs and you know, tried to get some quantitative data, not qualitative data, around what's driving SOCs. Where should people focus? And as we can see here, hopefully you can see there on the bottom left, you know, what do you think you might need to automate from your SOC perspective, and sort of, you know, the reporting, the really mundane sort of stuff that SOC analysts hate doing. That's the sort of stuff you can drive through SOAR platforms. And then we get up into the orchestration layers, where sort of, you know, your BAU type activity for the SOC is, but where we really want to get to, and sort of thinking back to the knowledge triangle there, your wisdom, your intuition, that's what you want to be driving from your SOC analysts. And yeah, Bruce likes to use this one, so I'll use it here, is, you know, we want the analysts to be using their big brains on the right activities. And, you know, that sort of the hunting and those types of activities up in that top right corner there, you know, is where the human analysts can provide value. And it's what really drives the teams as well. That's the sort of stuff that they love doing. So, you know, focusing on those right areas and also focusing on what is relevant for the business, the organization that you're trying to protect. You can't just think of it from a technical perspective. It goes back to, I think on the last slide, we talked a bit about risks and what's happening across the organization.
Yeah, on that one, and I think it's a great point on there about engaging smart people, right? So what do smart people like to do? They like to solve problems. What do smart people not like to do is just the menial tasks. And where we've been leveraging SOAR is to take care of the busy work, right? So an incident investigation, you might have to go to IP rep and URL rep and dark web searches and everything else. But going back to the standards of the process and procedures, we know the things that we're going to look for. We know how. So we can take all of that and remove the swivel chair and the cutting and pasting and everything else that drives an analyst crazy, because they're not adding value. They're not engaging their cerebral material, right? The gray matter. What we want to do and what we've been working on and successful at is, as those repeated things come in, that's automated. So when an analyst looks at the incident, all that work's been done, so they can immediately engage, and then we can take this and put it into a NIST framework, a MITRE ATT&CK framework, whatever makes the most sense for the client in the situation, but they can engage and immediately start to work the problem. So not only is it saving time, but it's also saving frustration from the employees and not having to do, Prescott was pointing out on the bottom left where you're doing, the reporting and that stuff. You're actually getting up into, that knowledge and then the wisdom and then the continuous improvement on that. Next slide, please. So now that we kind of told you the problems, some of the other stuff, how do we fix this? Next slide. So you have to understand your risk posture. If you don't know the company that you're in and the attack vectors, is in the data breach investigations report in there, and they've been doing it, this is the 14th edition, they break it down by industries. And different industries have different attack, vectors on it. And it doesn't mean that you can't have one out of here, but no company has an infinite amount of resources that they can throw at all problems. So what we're trying to say is take the money that you have, and if you were in, transportation, and these are the most common attack vectors, and you have limited budget, then go in and do the work and the research and understand and how to protect those. The other thing is that's on here, once again, we'll find is 85% of involve a human element, right? There's either that's phishing or it's a manual error. You need to understand what these are. Ransomware, it doesn't have to get, as too successful, but once it gets in, it can spread and it can do a lot of damage. And it's still financially motivated, right? Well, why did people, in the Wild West go and, hold up the stagecoach? Because that's where the money was. And now they're going after the banks. And it's also the others we found and talked about it earlier. Some of the organizations now have, criminals as a service or criminal activity as a service, ransomware, DDoS as a service. So you need to understand that why people are going to be coming after you, how to protect it, and how to drive and how to take limited resources and put it into the best posture so that you can respond to those.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll just add there, Bruce, as we're transitioning is, I'm doing my MBA at the moment, and it'd be remiss of me not to say for my IT governance lecturer that what you do in the SOCs should link back to the organization's enterprise risk management strategy from a business perspective, not just from an IT perspective. That's a critical link in making sure that you're addressing what specific needs of the business are.
No, excellent point.
All right, next slide, please. So what does it look like for Asia Pacific? What are the types of risks that you might see and need to be worried about? There's a lot of fine print here. By all means, go down, download the report, send me an email, I'll send it to you if you like. Yeah, there's one thing that was interesting in our data set was this year there are actually more breaches in Asia Pacific than there were in any other region in our data set. And I think the number of contributors in region was around 20 out of 83. So as you can see, they're regionally focused. There's a much higher risk of exposure to a data breach. 70% of those attacks in APAC had a social engineering action associated with them. So that could be a phishing email, it could be an attempted business email compromise. But the interesting part there is that those attacks almost exclusively harvested credentials. That's the focus of where attackers are going after. And then using those credentials to escalate and compromise web-based applications, particularly in cloud as well. So there's some really interesting takeaways. Asia Pacific is a little bit different from the rest of the world. Comparing to the US, for instance, I think social engineering actions were present in about 35% of breaches. So it's definitely something to be concerned about here.
Next slide, please.
All right, next slide. So one of the other things we talked about was, more logs does not necessarily make more visibility to the organization. And I'd really like to credit here Nathan Clark, who was my SOC manager up until recently for enterprise customers. And he's got this methodology he uses called a Ricci charts. And it's really focused, and I just wanted to quickly talk you through this as a way to help your SIEM engineering crew look at what's the best log sources. So what we're doing here is we're taking a number of use cases that we've developed for a particular customer to address their risks. We look through what are the types of logs that we might need to provision into the SIEM platform, where are the actual sources for those, and then what's available, what's not available, and is it used in any correlation and alerts. There's a bit of scribble over here that might be a bit hard to read. But then the really powerful thing is looking at how, as a whole, your SIEM platform is performing and what log sources are critical to driving those use cases, which map back to the organizational risk. So this is something we've implemented in practice with some of our customers. We find it really valuable, and I'd recommend you to reach out to Nathan Clark, who many of you may know, and have a chat with him if you want to find out more. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Prescott. And that is important, right? It goes back to just because you have more devices doesn't necessarily mean the volume of logs. It just means you need to be smart about how you go in which parts of it. The last thing here that we want to do is, invest in your people, processes, and technology. At the people level, you need to continue to, it's like, the care and feeding. Got to give them interesting work. They have to be able to, if you're not eliminating the repeated work, the daily reports, those types of things, the smart, good people are going to leave because they are in high demand and they're going to want to go do interesting things. So you have to give them the opportunities. One of the things I think Verizon does very well, and part of being of a larger corporation, is with our human resources and learning and development, creating specific career paths, giving people lots of opportunity to move. Within Verizon as a whole, we have well over 2,500 security specialists. And what it is there's different teams. So if you're on the managed security side and you wanted to go work at the corporate CISO, you could do that, or you could go to the network or to PS. But it's creating those opportunities, those unique opportunities where people can move around and get greater exposure, keep interest, move on to new projects. The other thing, it's about the processes, and this is the unsexy stuff, but this is the stuff that really does matter. This is for your ISO 9000, your ISO 27000, your IRAPs, your HIPAAs, your SOCs. And what we find and what we've done is, especially with our ISO processes, is really identified this and embraced it to identify the risk from the grassroots and then to drive resolution of these. By having the processes and having them documented and doing it in these formats, it at first it's tedious, but then you'll find that it actually does reduce risk. It helps identify that, then you get the resources. The other one is, if you don't have the process and it's not standard, you can't automate, because you can't do a playbook if you don't know what you're doing. And then the final one is the technology, and it's the combination of the people and the processes. And we are a huge advocate of SOAR. We're leveraging SOAR across multiple teams. We're doing this to not only help with the incident investigation, but now we're leveraging this on the device management. We're not only doing it on the security side, but on the network side, where we have 300,000 plus devices in 107 countries. But you tie that technology into the processes and people, and then, like I said earlier, where you have the change management, the ITIL base to do the playbooks based on the processes. People roll it out and they'll use it. And this is how we feel that this is the best way to do it. Leverage the SOAR, leverage the technology, but that can only be based on the processes. And then you turn it over to smart people, and that's how you're going to keep them engaged. Prescott, anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, bang on, Bruce. For me, it always has been the people the most important. And I know there's probably a few people in the room here that have worked with us in the past. I think there's a lot to be done around, psychology in how we manage SOCs, looking at behavior. I think one of those things for a SOC manager is, or any leader in security operations is, I think Bruce, you sort of said it before, it's getting the right problem to the right person, engage their brain as quickly as possible, and then adding value to the organization and to the wider economy as well.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So with that, want to thank all of you and appreciate your time and attention. Hopefully we gave you some key insights and some things to think about. Once again, appreciate your time. We are leveraging SOAR, we're leveraging process technology, but at the end of it, I think you'll hear once again, it is the people that make the difference on all of this. And your job as a security leader is to harness the best out of the people, give them the tools and resources that they need, help them kind of get in the right direction, and then stand back and you'll be surprised at the great things they'll do. So this, I think we're ready to do Q&A if there's any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bruce and Prescott. Can we have a round of applause? And a special thank you to Bruce for what's probably 1 a.m. over there right now.
Yeah, 1 a.m.
Wow. Yeah, so thank you very much for staying up there. Were there any questions? I don't have any questions on the Q&A app. Were there any questions around the room I can run around? No, there's no questions in the room. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy your Friday. We're going to enjoy our weekend over here.
Perfect.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So with that, that's me done. That's we're going to vacate the premise and collapse the walls and do all those sorts of things. But I was going to say one more dad joke for the road if anyone's keen on that, or you people have had enough. One more? All right, one for the road. Here we go. Two peanuts are walking down the street. One was assaulted. I love this. I love it. I love pressing F5 as well. It's very refreshing. That's too far. There you go. Cool. Everyone have a lovely afternoon. That's me. And come back because we're going to have a speed debate. It's always super interesting to watch that one. So thank you very much.
With your voice inside my head, I'm sleeping on your side of the bed. It don't feel like you're gone. I'm falling to pieces, wondering why we didn't stop us shattering.